Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Holiday Travel and Planning for 2024 live stream. I'm Brian Walker, your host for today. It's my pleasure to introduce Liz Profumo and Jordana Schwartz-Matricardi, who are seasoned attorneys at Global Talent Immigration Law Group. They specialize in extraordinary ability visas, and today they're here to offer you valuable tips for traveling during the holidays with this special visa category. So without further ado, let's dive into this enlightening session with Liz and Jordana and learn how to make your holiday travels smoother and stress-free.
Big question because every visa type is going to be slightly different. So I think a lot of people who are tuning in today actually have O1 visas, for artists and people who can show extraordinary ability in their field. So anyone who's looking to apply for an O1 visa, it's a little bit more of a process. There's a petition that has to be filed by a U.S. employer or petitioner that can show that the applicant has a history of success in their field and has some a high public profile with some press, some work on important projects or for important companies. And then in addition, once that part is approved, then the applicant has to actually submit a DS-160 visa application at a U.S. embassy and go through that process. So for an O1 visa, there's going to be quite a bit of information and documentation that's required. Now, for people who are just looking to travel as visitors, in that case, you really have to prove to the consular officer that you have the financial means to support yourself during your trip without working. So you have to show some kind of bank or asset statement. And then you also have to fill out that DS-160 and apply for the visitor visa at a U.S. embassy, with proof that you just plan to make a short visit and you're not planning to work or study while you're in the U.S.
Okay. And Deanna has another question, not related to travel, but rather to the filing of an O1 petition. And she's just wondering what specialization to focus on. She's both a founder of an agency and is in marketing. So which one would be better to choose?
So from my experience, of course, every case is different. Everyone's situation and evidence is different. From what I've seen, founders and entrepreneurs tend to have better documentation for an O1 than people who work in marketing. So that doesn't mean that folks who work in marketing won't qualify, but the O1 criteria tends to be geared more heavily towards people who are public facing. Mm-hmm. And that tends to be founders more so than people who work in marketing. So of course we have to assess, each situation individually, but normally I'd say founders are going to qualify more readily. But Diana, please, reach out so we can assess your situation personally.
Okay. So the second question here comes from Audrey Clinette, and she's in Paris, and she wants to know if there are any restrictions on travel under an O1 visa.
Oh, that's a very good question. So actually, the O1 is a visa that does not have restrictions on travel, and it goes both ways, meaning that there's not any minimum or maximum amount of time that needs to be spent in the U.S. to maintain your O1 status. So anyone with an O1 visa can travel, there's no limitation on travels.
Okay. And what about international business travel?
So, their international business travel is fine. So again, no restrictions. So there are other visa types that do require applicants to either be in the U.S. for a minimum amount of time, or limit the amount of time they can be abroad. And the O1 is not one of those. So O1 visa holders, don't worry about spending too much time abroad.
Yes. Okay. Now the third question comes from Gonzalo Bauza in Madrid, and he wants to know, are there new requirements in order to obtain an O1 visa comparable to before the pandemic?
Good question. So the law has not changed since, before or after the pandemic. There are always trends in visa processing. So I would say what is different now than before the pandemic is that these days USCIS tends to look a lot more closely at your job offers and the conditions of the employment than they did prior to the pandemic. It's not a new law. It's just an emphasis on enforcement, I would say.
Okay. And to follow up with that question, are there any new forms or documents that need to be submitted or brought along with them?
So no, there's no new forms. Actually, during the pandemic, the administration at that time added a lot of information to the forms about every applicant's financial background, which was then removed from the forms in recent years. So no, there's nothing new in terms of forms filed with USCIS, because they are looking at the job offers more closely. When the application's submitted, it's good to include more documentation about the employers and the future work.
Okay. The next question comes from Loida Cameron, excuse me, and she's from Guyana, and she wants to know if we can help with an individual, if we can help an individual who's been declined or has not been approved for a visa at the embassy.
At the embassy. Okay. So whenever someone is denied at an embassy for a visa, it does not preclude the applicant from trying again. So I think we would need a little bit more information, what kind of visa was denied. The reality is that if you apply for a visitor visa and you're denied for a visitor visa at an embassy, unfortunately, it can be difficult to overcome that denial. It's not necessarily impossible, but it is an uphill battle. If you've been denied for an employment visa, then if you're able to cure the reasons for the denial, then a lot of times it is possible to get the employment visa issued after an employment visa denial.
Okay. Now, Alejandro Garcia is asking us, he's from Mexico City, and he's asking, what are the necessary steps I should take to ensure smooth re-entry into the U.S. after traveling abroad during the holidays on an O1 visa?
Okay, so if you're traveling abroad on an O1 visa during the holidays, which I think probably a lot of people who are tuned in are, so of course you have to make sure your passport is valid for at least 6 months after entry, that your visa is valid. It does not necessarily for 6 months, that it will be valid on the date that you re-enter the U.S. It's always advisable to have your O1 approval notice with you. Technically, you should not have to show it, but in case, it could be helpful in case you get an officer that is skeptical. And then most importantly, I think you want to also be able to answer questions about what you're going to be doing when you re-enter. So you want to confirm that you're, upon your return to the U.S., when you're asked what is the purpose of your visit, you confirm that you're here to return to work and that you're able to say what you do and the basic terms of your visa.
Okay. Aya Nakamura from Tokyo asks, how can I verify that my O1 visa remains valid for the duration of my holiday travel plans?
Okay, so, there's really, when a visa is issued, it's going to have an expiration date on it. So assuming that the expiration date on your visa is later than the date when you will return to the U.S., then you're fine for your travels. Now, if your visa is not valid anymore, or if it will expire, if it's either expired when you leave or expired before you plan to return, then you'll need to either go for an interview or mail your passport in to a U.S. embassy to have a new visa stamped in your passport before you're able to return to the U.S. after your trip.
Okay. Simone Rossi from Rome is asking, what essential documents should I carry with me while traveling internationally during the holidays on an O1 visa? I think we answered a similar question, but if you just want to reiterate.
Yeah, sure. So yes, traveling for the holidays, your valid passport containing a valid visa. If your valid visa is in an old passport, bring both your passports, your approval notice. I think that's it. Yeah.
And what about for Canadians? Because I know Canadians have a little bit of a different situation.
So Canadians actually don't need to have visas stamped into their passport. So Canadians just need to travel with their valid passport and approval notice.
Okay. All right. So Priya Singh from Mumbai, are there any specific travel restrictions or advisories I need to be aware of while planning holiday travel on an O1 visa?
So I know we've touched on certain parts of this in terms of, there's not really restrictions related to the amount of time you have to be in the U.S. Now, in recent years, we've had vaccination requirements and restrictions, related to COVID, which thankfully this year are not really weighing anyone down for holiday travel. So I think it's just making sure you have your valid passport, visa, approval notice, Priya.
And as a follow-up, if my O1 visa is close to expiration, how should I plan my holiday travels to avoid complications with renewal or refiling?
So if your visa is still valid but will be expiring soon, you can do a couple things. If you're planning to return to the US while the visa is still valid, even if it's only valid for a short time, you can return to the US. So if your visa expires on the 31st of the month and you want to come back on the 27th, that's okay. You can use that visa to enter the United States as long as you have a petition that will allow you to stay longer. So I know that can be complicated. So anyone with questions about this, reach out to us to talk about your individual situation. So I don't know what else should
I mean, I think that's about right. And maybe just to remind people, when you do re-enter the U.S., to always check your I-94 status online, because that's really what's going to be controlling. Okay. And then the last question we have here is from Nia Thomas. Actually, this is the last question we're taking before we check our chat to see if there's any questions there. From Nia Thomas, she's from Nairobi, and she's asking, can my family members accompany me during my holiday travels if I'm on an O1 visa, and what are their visa requirements?
Okay. So spouses and children under 21 are able to accompany visa holders with O3 visas. So in order to apply for O3 visas, the spouse and children will need to fill out the DS-160 and attend appointments at the embassy. They have to present the document that shows the relationship, so either birth certificate or marriage certificate, as well as the O1 visa holder's approval notice.
And let's see if there's any questions in the chat. I actually don't see any questions, but luckily we have a second live stream today at 4:30 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. So if there's any questions people have, they can always ask that as well. So do you have any comments?
Just that, I know a lot of people are traveling for the holidays, and there are always a lot of questions about visa issuance and what happens to the consulates and the various steps involved in obtaining the visa stamps. So anyone that has questions about it, we know it's a complicated system. So please ask us your questions or reach out to us to ask your questions individually. Thank you. I hope everyone has a great holiday.
Same. Thank you.
And that brings us to the end of our holiday travel and planning for 2024 live stream. A huge thank you to Liz Profumo and Jordana Schwartz-Matricardi for their invaluable insights and tips on traveling with an extraordinary ability visa. We hope you found this session informative and helpful for your upcoming holiday travels. Don't forget to visit our website for more resources and to stay updated on future events. Thank you for joining us today, and we wish you safe and enjoyable travels. Until next time, take care.